Hey, how's it going? I'm going to do a lot of talk on web performance today, and specifically using the Chrome DevTools to diagnose some performance problems, talking about how to fix them. I am doing a full-day workshop at Forward where it's going to be all about DevTools, so I'll talk about all of the tabs, how to build or debug, or all these cool things to do. But today it's just going to focus on performance. So I guess to get the very beginning to get started is opening the DevTools. You got three choices you can use. You can right-click anywhere on the page and inspect element. You can go to View, Developer Tools, or you can use a keyboard shortcut. On Mac, I use Command Option I. You can also use, I think it's Control Shift I if you're on Windows. So there's 8 main tabs across the top here. Since we're focusing on performance, I'm just going to be covering network, timeline, profiles, and audits today. So basically, before we get started with web performance, I kind of want to talk about its importance. And one of my favorite resources is some research that was gathered by this WordPress plugin. The WordPress plugin is W3 Total Cache. Let me make my screen a little bit bigger. They found some really interesting statistics about initial page load. And so it's like there's 3 use cases here where it's like Google found that with just a half a second speed decrease, they lost 20% traffic. So that's like people bouncing off their page. Yahoo, with a 400 millisecond decrease, had 5 to 9% full page traffic loss. And Amazon was noticing a 1% sales loss for 100 milliseconds of speed decrease. So we're really not just talking about how snappy and easy to use your website or app is. We're really talking about potentially, lost sales, people just bouncing from your site and not coming back, those kind of things. I think it's especially important because most of us develop on really high-end, nice machines on really good networks, and that's not necessarily true for our users. So I think it's important to optimize your site because frequently you're going to get a lot of people like on older phones, on 3G networks, things like that, accessing your site, and they're likely to have a way worse experience. So I'm kind of going to break this into 2 sections of performance. One is the initial page load. So we'll talk about all the things that you can do to speed up the initial page load and how to find problems and what those might look like. And then I want to talk about runtime performance. So like after your site or app has loaded, what the experience is like as you're scrolling around or clicking around on things, interacting with the site in any way. I think they're both really important stories. So the first thing that I usually do is I start off with, let's go back here, in the DevTools, I start off with the Audits tab. And the Audits tab basically can do like a refresh of your page, and it monitors all these different things and looks for common problems with your site. If you want to get a little bit more in-depth with the Audits tab, the same technology can be found at Google PageSpeed Insights, but it gives you a lot more information. So if your site's online, you can enter the URL here and it'll do it. But just for today, we're going to stick with the DevTools. So I found this site here, conceptart.org. It's like one of the most popular forums, and I thought forums would be good because they're typically suffer from performance problems. And I think a lot of the reason is just that with like a content management system or a forum, you're often have like a platform where you're installing a bunch of different plugins, and those all come with their own JavaScript, style sheets, images. So it gets really hard to control because you don't really own a lot of the stack. You're just like installing plugins and using them. So if we go ahead and open the DevTools, go to the Audits tab, they break it into 2 different categories, network utilization and the actual web page performance. And they do a really good job of separating them. So I'm going to go ahead and hit reload page on audit and audit on load and then run it. So it's going to go out and trigger a refresh on the page, and while it's doing the refresh, it's going to be analyzing kind of everything that comes down. And when it finishes, it'll give us like a really nice report of what was good, what was wrong, and what was, it'll differentiate between serious problems. Here we go. So you can see the serious problems they mark in red, and then warnings or things that would have maybe a lower amount of performance gain to fix, they mark in yellow. So this forum's really good because it highlights some of the most common ones you see. So just to go through them, this is very common. So you'll see these red warnings about combining external CSS and JavaScript. So I'm not sure where everybody's at, like how much experience they've had with front-end packaging, but the essential idea here is that HTTP, which is the protocol that we all use for our websites, can only handle so many synchronous downloads. So like if you send a page and that page has, let's say, 20 script tags, what Chrome will do is it'll get as many as it can starting to download at first, let's say 4. And as they finish, then it can start loading the next one. So if you had like 20, it would take you maybe like 5 series of downloading all these things. And because of that, it's highly recommended that you concatenate all of your CSS and all of your JavaScript into a single file and send that down. So there's a couple ways to do that. If you're a front-end developer, I would recommend a task runner. That's like the main thing they do. So if anybody's heard of Gulp or Grunt or Webpack or Browserify, and I can put links into those after this, but I would recommend one of those. It's like one of their core functionality is to like go through and find all of your scripts and make one out of it. If you're on like a content management system, there's almost always a plugin available, like the W3 Total Cache plugin I showed for WordPress back before. One of the features that it has is helping you combine and minify all of your things. So combining them all into one file is great, and then minification is basically removing all white space and turning all of the function names and variable names into as short as it possibly can. And this just saves you bytes over the wire, like less data will be coming down. The next thing, which is really common, is over here, enable Gzip compression. So the basic idea here, Gzip is GNU zip, and it's just a compression format, like if you've used tarballs or zip before. But the cool thing about Gzip is that Chrome, like all of your browsers, actually have the ability to decompress them. So what's basically the idea here is if you can zip them using this compression format on your server, then you can send way smaller files down, and then the browser will know how to uncompress them. So I think if we see here, it'll show you these files. A lot of these are minified in their names, but it'll show you how much savings you could get. So like for example here, this visit.js, if we gzipped it, it could save you 5.4 kilobytes. So again, just like we're going to stick with the DevTools for today, but if you're looking on how to do this, there's a lot of different plugins. So if you're using something with like Apache-based, like WordPress or some PHP app, you can just go into your htaccess file, and I'll link this to thisbetterexplained.com, but they have like basically you just put this in your htaccess file or something similar, and it'll gzip all of your assets. If you're using something like Node or like Express, maybe, I think they have one that's called Express Compression or something like that. But either way, if you look up the technology you're using and then how to gzip, that should be pretty helpful. So that's a really common one to see. This one is leverage browser caching. So some of you may know, like when you hit a website, let's say, and it has jQuery, it sends jQuery down to you, and then you refresh the website or click on another page, there's really no reason to send jQuery down again. So what you can do is you can tell the browser to cache that file because it's not going to change. You don't need a different one. And so basically what this is saying is it found a bunch of different files that don't have cache expiration on them. So it doesn't know what to do with those, so it's not going to cache those. So these are probably things, 73 of them, that we could cache, and we wouldn't have to download again each time we click around on the forum. Similarly, these ones have a short cache lifetime, and this is something that you can kind of dig a little deeper on, and we can cover a little bit later too. Just kind of thinking about all of your files and thinking about how long is acceptable to cache them, basically. So that's really common to see. And then I think there's like one other thing, I guess down here. Okay, so CSS in the document head, basically it wants CSS always to go in between the open and close head tags. This is not always easy if you're using a content management system because you'll see a lot of like a plugin will call its own CSS or like we'll send out a font face request. But it's always good to look here if you've got these errors and if it's an app that you've built yourself, moving the CSS into the head. And then this is a big one here. So removed unused CSS rules. So it found on this forum 4,000, almost 4,500 unused CSS rules. So these are CSS selectors that are being sent down, but there's no elements that'll actually trigger them. There's going to be a couple of things. It's important to really understand what's going on here because if you have like a single page application and you send down unused CSS, but you're going to create that content later, then that's totally fine. A lot of times it's just kind of cruft, like stuff that's left over. So this is like a really nice tool. You can kind of go through and find any CSS selectors that aren't being used. And this is like right here for this form, it's 85% of the total size. is not used. So I'm sure there's like huge savings there. This is a little bit, not directly, but it a little bit contradicts with up here combining your external CSS and JavaScript. And here's where we kind of hit an area where there's not like a one solution for everything. So it's telling you that you should combine your CSS and JavaScript, or CSS and JavaScript into one file each. But then it's like, well, don't send down any unused CSS rules. So you basically have to know your app or your website and see does it make sense to just send the one file down, or sometimes what people do is they do a couple of combinations. So they'll have like a core bundle.css, which every page needs, and then maybe for the form you could have like a separate file that was like your homepage.css, or one that was like individual post.css, things like that. So it's kind of up to you to kind of tweak it, figure out what would work best for your website, kind of balancing between the idea of combining them all and the idea of not sending down stuff you don't need. One thing that I don't see here that's very common is talking about image sizes. So images are almost always the biggest page weight, like the biggest thing that you send down to the user. So there's a lot that can be done there. The first one, if you're working with fixed sizes, is just make sure that your image is the appropriate size. Like I often see websites that send out an image that's, say, like 2,000 pixels by 2,000 pixels, and then they put it in like a 500 pixel by 500 pixel div. So there you have like a lot of easy savings just by doing that. But the other thing that's just a very simple win is what they call lossless image compression. And so basically what you can do here is images come with all of this extra junk attached to them that you don't see, like metadata and signatures and all this stuff. So there's tools out there that'll just kind of remove all that stuff. And it's called lossless because it doesn't affect the quality of the image, but it does affect the size of the image. So for Mac, I use this program, Imageoptim. It's imageoptim.com. And it's a really nice UI where you just like drag your folder, your images folder in, and it'll losslessly compress them and resave them. Back to what I was mentioning before, like if you're using a task manager, there's like Imageoptim plugins for like Gulp and Grunt and all those things. So using them, as just part of your build process can be really nice. And as you can see here, this is like really isn't an exaggeration. Like frequently you can save around 50% of your total file size without sacrificing any quality. So that's really great. And then lastly, if you're on a content management system, they all have plugins. Like WordPress has a bunch of like lossless compression plugins, which will automatically go through your images. So this is like really important to add to your workflow in some way, whether you're like a full-time developer and you can set it up with Gulp, or whether you're managing websites with like a content management system, finding a plugin to use. Yeah, that's really important. And those are like usually the big takeaways from this audit. And the audits I find are like kind of the lowest hanging fruit. Like you do this audit, like if I owned this app, I'd find a way to combine all these things. I'd cache all my things and I'd add Gzip compression. And I think that'll make a really substantial performance improvement. So that's pretty cool. I think after that, like after kind of the audit's done, and hopefully you can remove all the red from here, the next thing that I like to do is I like to go to the network panel, which is over here. And this one gets a little bit overwhelming, so I'm just going to take a step back before we, before we dive too deep. So basically what I want to do here is I want to get the story of the page load, like what happens, how many requests we're sending, how big they are, maybe poke around at what the biggest ones are, and then just seeing like where time is spent as the page is loading. So there's kind of a lot to be gained, but it does look really overwhelming at first. So I'm going to close these. I'm going to go to the New York Times site. I thought they would be cool just because it's like a really big site, it's really popular, but it also has a ton of dynamic content, like tons of images and different articles, which makes it a little bit hard to optimize. So I thought it would be kind of cool to do a network analysis here. Okay, so I'm going to open the DevTools. And then one thing that I always do for these is I go over here to these three dots here, and I pop the DevTools out into their own window. So now on my Mac, I can use like Command tilde to switch back and forth, or you could, if you have other monitors, drag them away. So there's a couple of really cool things in the network panel, like before we start going here. So we've got this button over here, which is Start Recording. So you can record and refresh the page, or you could just record the network panel as things are going if you wanted to monitor like AJAX requests or something like that. You can clear it over here. One really cool thing that they've added pretty recently is the ability to capture screenshots. So what Chrome does is like every time there's a repaint, it'll take a little screenshot of it, so you can really see like what your users are experiencing as the page loads. I think this is really great because, again, with performance not being a one-size-fits-all thing, like maybe if you have an app where most people hit the home page and immediately want to go to like their profile or their notifications or something like that, you can start figuring out what gets shown when, and maybe you can optimize your markup to show, you know, like to send down the navigation first and to send down the JavaScript needed for the navigation right away. So it's kind of cool. You can start like really understanding your site. And then I'm going to skip these for right now. And then the other thing I wanted to point out was this really great feature, which is network throttling. So let me move this down a little bit. So basically, network throttling lets you simulate different network conditions. I think this is really, really important for web developers because, like I said before, the common use case for your site might not be people on really nice machines on broadband connections. So one thing I like to do is I like to go to this good 3G, it's kind of right in the middle, and see what it would be like if you're out and about, maybe on your phone, and you check out my website. And then the last thing that I wanted to cover before we run this network is back over here. Click on the three dots and click on settings. And we've got these two really important settings here. One that I leave on all the time is this disable cache while DevTools is open. So like we talked about before, files get marked by the server with how long they should be cached for. But if you're a developer working on a site with DevTools open, you really don't want to be caching files because it's going to kind of mislead you about performance. It won't be what people visiting your site for the first time experience. So I leave this on all the time. And then this one here, disable JavaScript, I use once in a while. It's not really performance related, but a lot of people feel like your website should still work at least in some rudimentary way with JavaScript disabled. So this is cool if you wanted to check out how that performs. The warning, though, is that disable JavaScript is not while the DevTools are open. So if you click disable JavaScript, it will disable JavaScript until you click enable JavaScript. So I've done that before a lot of times where I disable it and forget about it. So making sure this disable cache is on is great. I'm going to go back here. So we've got disable cache on, simulating network conditions. I would like to see the screenshots. And then I'm just going to hit Command-R to refresh, which will automatically trigger recording the network log. So it's going to basically go out and start recording. I know this looks overwhelming if you haven't seen this before, but it's basically recording in order from the top down every single asset that gets requested. So this complicated looking thing over here is actually just going to be the document itself. So if we click on it, you get this new panel that pops up and you can see like the response, and it's just HTML. So this is like the HTML that comes down. And then from there it calls style.css. Then it calls its first JavaScript thing. Okay, so there's kind of a lot going on here. The first thing that I'll start with, I guess, now is the images, because they're pretty easy to understand, and then we can hide them away. So if you double click on them, it opens up a preview. So this is when I started the refresh before the page is really gone. And then at like 226 milliseconds, you can see down here, it triggered the white screen, and the screen stayed white until 2.44 seconds when it painted this little border here. So on a 3G connection, that's like a pretty substantial amount of time that you're just looking at a white screen. Then after that, we can see a few milliseconds later, it paints these this first image and these first couple articles, which I think is pretty nice because you can start reading right away. And the image is in place, which means that you're not going to see the screen jolt around. So that's pretty cool. Again, like this becomes kind of a conscious choice of what do you want to send down first, because some users on slower connections are only going to see the first thing. Anyway, you can kind of click through, and I think it's kind of cool that you can just see like the order in which things come in. But you can see, I'm going to start clicking kind of quickly, that it actually takes a pretty substantial amount of time before navigation comes in. So these are a bunch of different little minor paints. I'm not even really seeing the difference. There we go. So then it was like from like whatever it was, like 2.5 seconds to 5 seconds before the navigation comes in. I think that's fine for New York Times because I think most people probably want to hit the home page. But if you had a different site like Facebook where you'd want to check your messages right away, it would probably be important to send the messages down first, that notifications tab. So that's the screenshots. I think they're really cool. They really help me like understand what my users are experiencing, especially ones on slower connections. But I'm going to go ahead and hide those for now so we can kind of get back to what we were working on here with everything. I'm not sure if this is a bug or not, but sometimes when I open and close the screenshots, I lose all the rest of my requests. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit a refresh to get them again. Okay, cool. So we can see the order in which everything comes down, and we can see a bunch of different things. Like the method could be important. You can check get. These are HTTP verbs like get, post, put, all those things. You can see the status, which is actually one of the things I use most often in the network panel, is like if I'm checking to see whether or not my resources are loading. I'll sometimes check here. Like you can see that they all loaded for the New York Times page, but if you were like mistyped a CSS file or a JavaScript file, you would see here that it would, 500 or 404 depending on the error. The names is not super important, but the initiators can be really important. So the initiator is like what calls what, essentially. So it kind of helps you paint a picture of how your website loads. So you can see like this CSS file here was initiated by this JavaScript file with the same name. So you've got like JavaScript calling CSS at that point. The size is really useful, especially like just to do an initial check of like what's taking the most space. So like here we've got all these different, like this JavaScript file is the biggest one, and then we've got some images that are pretty big, and then getting all the way down to like really, really minor things like these thumbnails. Okay, cool. One neat trick, which is just kind of a little tidbit, is if you hold Shift while scrolling around on any of these, this is like a kind of cool Easter egg where if you hold Shift over one, it'll show you in red the files that calls, and in green the files that call it. So you can see like from the original URL called this JavaScript, and then this JavaScript calls on these things. That's kind of neat. You can also do the same thing by just looking at the initiator, but I think that's kind of cool. And then the last thing, I'm just going to set this back to no throttling, so it's the normal connection, and hit refresh one more time so you can see the page refreshing. The last thing that I really use is just looking at the waterfall itself. So it's like basically, let me wait for all these things to load in. Basically, you've got every file, it'll show you kind of where it starts and where it ends. So if you, basically what you would want to look out for here are really fat rectangles. So you'd want to see like what's taking like a really, really, really long time to come down, and is there anything I can do about it? So this site looks really good. There aren't any that I noticed. I do see this one here, like, let's see, it's some PHP GET request. And what's really nice is you can click on them and it tells you what the time was spent doing. So try not to go too far with this, but some really neat things are like, if it's waiting, you can look into why. If it takes a really long time to download and it's not that big, maybe you can check your backend to see if there's an issue there. Same thing if there's any stalling or queuing, maybe you can combine requests. So there's like some pretty cool stuff here, and I can cover it more in depth at a later point, but that's most of what I use the network for. The other big thing is just this sneak peek down at the bottom, and this is really great. So you want to see how many, let me see if I can make this bigger, how many total requests came through. 323 is a pretty good amount, but again, it's a very dynamic site. How much was transferred? So 2.6 megabytes is really, really big. I think that once you get over 1 megabyte, it's going to start to be noticeable, really noticeable for people on mobile devices. So it's just kind of something you want to keep in mind. Again, like if you just have a ton of images or a ton of content you need, then that's fine, but it's good to know. And then the other things that are really important is these two different events. So DOM content loaded when that gets fired, and then the actual load. So these are just the browser events that maybe you've listened for in JavaScript before. So one cool thing is like maybe you can optimize things so that you send down like your code asynchronously, like your JavaScript can be async, which will help you fire this DOM content loaded event really early and let the user start moving around, even if the load event comes later. So yeah, I think those are like my big things with the networking tab. Oh, the other important thing is over here, this little funnel. If you click down on this, you get this option to filter. And this is probably the other area where I use it a lot. So you can either filter by a name, which is really cool. So you can look at like chart or something like that, and you can see chart beat. But you can also filter by type. So I frequently, like if you just want to check AJAX requests, you can click here, and we can see that only these are the AJAX requests. Similarly, if you want to see like how many images there are, you can click on images. And then another neat trick is that you can hold Command or Control if you're on Windows, and you can select multiple at the same time. So you could see like only the JavaScript, CSS, and images, something like that. I use that a good amount too, just to like, you know, if I'm like looking for an image on a page, you can just go ahead and click images, and then you get a sub list of what's there. So I think that's good. Again, this isn't so much like finding the specific problem as much as telling you a story of like how your page loads. So I would definitely just be careful with like have as few requests as you can because the requests are expensive, and that goes back to concatenating your scripts, and then really try to keep the size small. I love sites under 1 meg, but frequently you just have needs. Cool. So kind of with that being said, between the audit and the network, that's like what I usually do for initial page load. And so then the next section I just wanted to talk about was runtime performance. So now after your page has loaded, people are on the app messing around with it, how does it perform? So for this, I like to start in the timelines tab. And unfortunately, there's like a ton of stuff going on here, which I think is like one of the big problems. Like the developer tools are so amazing, but they're just really overwhelming to use. So I think I'm gonna just try to like work through a little bit of a timeline profile and like hopefully keep things like you don't have to use every bit. You don't even have to know what every bit does, but hopefully you can have enough to like start getting started, seeing where your website might have issues. Okay, so I'm gonna start a record up here, but before I do that, you have like all these different options of things you can capture. So one is screenshots, but we already saw screenshots with the network, so I'm gonna leave that one off. Paint. For those that don't know, painting is basically whenever the browser has to draw stuff. So it's like as your content loads, right, it'll paint it, and then maybe as CSS rules take over and have like float or background color or height or anything like that, the browser has to repaint. So this is kind of good to keep an eye on. And memory would be cool just to know how much memory the app uses and check for memory leaks. And then JS profile is really just like what your code is doing, like what your JavaScript's doing that might be having a performance hit. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to hit record over here, and I'm going to hop back to the site, and I'm just going to scroll around. So we're not doing like a new page load or anything like that. I'm just going to scroll around, and then I'm going to stop the recording. Just takes a minute to kind of like get it all sorted and make all these really overwhelming looking graphs, but I do promise they're really helpful. So basically we're going to take a quick look at the 3 different sections, which are JS profile, memory, and painting. For those that are new to this, I know it's like really, really intense looking, but a couple of things to notice. One, these red marks that stick out are really just the browser's way of telling you that it thinks that you're having some what they call page jank. And so page jank is just basically when they think the page is going to be kind of janky as opposed to a really smooth transition. So if you're not familiar with, there's like a lot of blog posts and talks about 60 frames per second, and you can even see it marked, like delineated here with this line. So anything that pops over it is less than 60 frames per second. And the basic idea is that almost all modern devices refresh their screen 60 times every second. And so basically, in order to get a really smooth-looking animation, page load, scroll, anything, the browser needs a new frame to give the screen every, say, 60 times a second. So if you do the math on that, like 1 second divided by the 60, you get like 16.6 or something like that. So you have like 16.6 milliseconds in order to come up with a frame. And according to Google, that's actually not totally true because the browser just has a bunch of what they call housekeeping work, no matter what is on your website. So they really give you 10 milliseconds, they say. And it's not really important that you dive into millisecond by millisecond, but it is important to understand that like all of these areas where it spikes up like this and where you see red means that the browser wasn't able to hand a frame 60 times a second. And so if you've ever been on a site where like you're trying to scroll and things are like really choppy or seen an animation that doesn't look smooth, the likely cause is that you're bouncing up a little bit too high here and you're not able to deliver 60 frames a second. So there's like a ton of stuff going on this page. Let's cover the summary so we can just start closing things off and making it a little simpler. So basically, we've got this this summary here. It's just a pie chart, and it's really just pretty simply showing you what time was spent doing. So yellow, we can see is the most for the New York Times, is just running JavaScript. So we can check into that in a minute. 1.13 seconds was spent rendering the entire page. That's not really a surprise, just because, like I said, there's dynamic content everywhere. A pretty small amount of time, 500 milliseconds, was spent painting, and then 28 milliseconds was like nothing was spent loading. So basically, what I can say from here is like the back end is really fast. We didn't waste much time loading new stuff. We don't have a painting problem, and I'll cover what a painting problem looks like in a minute, but we don't have one on New York Times. We do have like a lot of scripts running, and you can kind of see over here the colors match up. So there's like a ton of yellow, like almost everywhere where we see these red janks, there's yellow going on. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of hide this. It's because we've kind of covered it. Similarly with the memory, and it's really overwhelming looking, but essentially what you want to look at is that if things are going up and up and up and never going back down, it's very likely that you have some sort of memory leak. So it does appear that there's some kind of memory leak here. It's using more and more. Like you can look at the JavaScript heap size will be over here. So what you would really want to see is a site that, like you can see this is good how it starts. So it like builds up and then it purges all the stuff. And it builds up and then it purges all the stuff. So that's really what you would want to see. What you don't want to see is kind of this like sawtooth where it's going up and up and up and up. And I can picture, I'll show a better example of a memory leak in a second, but so we can kind of like hide the memory now, now that we've seen it. And then the very last thing is like, this is kind of interesting. You can control these different views of the same thing. I personally like this FlameChart view up here, so I'm going to click on this. And so this is like kind of the old view, just showing the jank and things like that. But the FlameChart, it's the same data, but it gives you basically what's going on here is that the x-axis is time spent, so big fat rectangles are bad ones, and then the y-axis is just the call stack of JavaScript. So you don't want to worry about tall ones, you want to worry about wide ones. So on this screen over here, if you scroll, you can start, if you scroll down, you can start zooming in on a certain area, which is pretty useful because like there's a ton of data here. And you can see as I zoom in on an area or zoom out on an area, it's kind of expanding and collapsing the FlameChart. So those are controlling each other. Another thing you can do is you can click and drag and just look at, like if I wanted to look at just this little area here, and then it'll expand the FlameChart. And then if you want, this is like a little bit tricky, if you want to scroll on the FlameChart itself, you have to hold Shift down, and then you can scroll down. So again, we're not really worried about these tall ones necessarily. But if we zoom out a little bit, we are worried about the biggest one. So it looks like this one right here is the biggest one. So if I zoom in on it a little bit, we can see, this is very common to see that functions that get triggered on the event scroll seem to be what are taking the most time. And similarly, this is also very common to see, it's almost always ads and tracking data. That's like almost always the cause of slow sites or page jank or things like that. So this is like, there's a lot to cover here, and I'll definitely go a lot more in depth in my workshop. But basically, how I would use this page is I would capture a little profile, I would zoom out all the way, and then I would start looking over here for like what the big ones are, and especially like what's going on around these red areas, these jank areas. So like from here, I would say that a lot of the time spent scripting is spent on this scroll listener. So if I were to like click on the function call itself, you can actually jump right, this is the aggregated page, you can actually click on something and you can jump right into the code. So if I wanted to see like what was getting called, I can click on this and it'll take me into the sources tab, which I'm not going to cover too much today, but you can basically see that it's like a bunch of these jQuery extends, which is a built-in method, and then if you kind of start scrolling down on it, you can see that where we end up getting to, we trigger, do some viewport stuff, and then like here is kind of where it starts. Let me pretty print this over here. We've got this, like, it defines this ad library, and then it starts doing, basically it's figuring out where to place all the ads. That's taking like a really significant amount of time. Cool, so I had like some kind of fun examples. The JavaScript stuff takes a good amount of time to like diagnose because you're really just looking through your own code. But if you were to see see how almost all the big spikes here are yellow because it's JavaScript. If you were to see a site where they were green or purple, that would have to do with screen painting. And those are pretty fun to fix, in my opinion. So I've got this cool site here. It's like a D3 app. And what it does is when you hover over something, it starts breaking it into these little circles. So something that's really cool, I'm going to open up DevTools, and then I'm going to dock them again to the bottom. And then from the any panel, you can hit escape, and it brings up this little, I'm trying to think what to call it, like this little drawer here. And the drawer is like normally used for getting quick access to console, although it has some other tabs that it can take. I'm going to go back 1 second and disable this thing and open DevTools again. It's not showing up. Give me 1 second. Not sure why it does this sometimes. Let me see. So usually there's another tab over here which will allow you to do some pretty cool stuff. Let me see if I can. I think it's experiment based. That's a bummer. Chrome show paint rectangles. Not sure. Yeah, usually there's a rendering tab. That's kind of a bummer. I don't know if I'll be able to get it going because it's not showing up right now. But basically, there's normally this rendering tab. Let me try just out of dumb luck, see if a new Chrome window fixes anything. It doesn't. Okay. So yeah, normally there's a rendering tab, which is really neat, and it allows you to really visualize where the screen paints are going on. And so what they'll do is they'll like hover green basically wherever screen repaints are happening, which I find really useful just because you can get a pretty good visual idea of how how Chrome is working. I'd really like to show it because I think it's cool, so I'm just gonna try one last attempt and open up Chrome Canary. And let me see if I can get. Yes, okay. So I'm not sure why it's not showing up in mine, but if you enable paint flashing, so you would see like anywhere in the console, you would hit escape and it would open up these, and you would hit rendering, enable paint flashing. And from here you can start really visualizing where Chrome is doing the work. So this is kind of cool. And I like this example especially because if you hover over them over and over and over again, eventually it turns into a picture of a koala, which I think is awesome. But so yeah, basically that's giving you an idea of like where Chrome is drawing the lines, and then like kind of similarly, if we go back to the New York Times with paint flashing enabled, we can really see like how it puts together the website, and more importantly, what happens as you scroll around. So you can see like this fixed header here has to get repainted as we scroll through. Also, I think like over here somewhere, there's like images that rotate. Not sure if I see any, but anyway, you can start seeing, I guess up here they've got an ad coming in, but you can start seeing like where all the repaints are happening. And there was this really cool example done by Harry Roberts, he's like CSS Wizard, something like that, and basically he found this article here on this person's blog, and let me open it in Canary so I can see the painting. And so what he did was he was noticing a little bit of page jank when he would scroll around. So he started scrolling through with the show paint rectangles on, and he was able to see that you can really see that the entire page repaints every single time. So he's got this great YouTube video which I can link to, but basically he does a little bit of poking around. Let me dock this back, and he ends up in the elements panel. He finds that there's this thing called menu animation wrapper, and so if you delete it, right-click, delete element, all of a sudden there's no more repaints. It's all white here now, which is pretty cool. So let me refresh, bring the thing back, and what you'll notice is that it's got position fixed on it. So position fixed is like one of the worst web performance things because the browser is constantly repainting to see where the element should be. But there's some really cool stuff you can do. For those that have heard of hardware acceleration, you can tell the browser to do something using the GPU as opposed to just doing it normally. So what he was able to do here is you can use this will change attribute and set it to transform, and that's basically telling the browser to push that duty to the GPU when you scroll the page. So now we can scroll, still leaving that animation in effect, and we see that there's no more full page repaints as we're doing it. So that's kind of cool. I use the show paint rectangles all the time. I definitely recommend like scrolling around on your app and just kind of seeing where you're getting repaints and what you should make sure of. Like things like up here, I think there's an animated GIF. Like this, there's nothing you can do about, right? It's like it actually needs to repaint because it's animated. Whereas like over here, this ad that keeps repainting, that's not doing anything different. It just probably happens to be fixed position, position fixed. So I think you can just add like again, like will change transform, and now we can see that it's not repainting this ad all the time anymore. So that stuff's really cool. There's a really great article, let me close these out, that Sarah Staten wrote, Everything You Need to Know About the Will Change Property. I definitely recommend reading this because it is not a good idea to just put will change on all of your fixed position things and handle it that way. So there's some really great stuff in here about how to handle that. And then I think the very last thing that I wanted to cover is the performance section, or the profile section rather. So I'm going to send this back, go to profiles. So basically what I do is after I do my initial page load stuff, so we covered the audits, we covered the network. Then I move into the timeline and I capture what we captured earlier. If I see memory as a problem or JavaScript, the yellow, as a problem, I move into profiles. If I see purple or green, the painting, as a problem, I enable paint rectangles and I start playing around on the site. So saying that JavaScript or memory was the issue, you can go into the profiles. And basically, they've got three options. I only really use the collect JavaScript profile and the heap allocations. So basically, this is like, if you're familiar with any debugging tools from other languages, this is like your pretty classic, like let me just run one of these. Oops. This is like your pretty classic kind of like top-down chart of like what got called, what's being used, functions, all those kind of things. So you can do like a view like this, and you can see like on this page there's really nothing going on. It's just idle in program. Whereas if I went back to like New York Times and then ran a profile over here and like scrolled around a little bit, it'll let me, and then stop. Then with this one, you'll get more of an idea of like what time is spent doing. And so like if I noticed that there was JavaScript, like a ton of yellow in the timeline, I would come over here and I would start looking at like what my most expensive functions are. So here you can see that like there's this anonymous function is the most expensive thing, and you can start diving into it and seeing like pretty standard view. So like this took 22% of the page loading time. And of that, we can drill deeper into it and see like what specific methods we're getting called. So it's like this set responsive class, this build fragment, whatever this is, like some prop hooks thing. So you can start diving into your code and seeing like these CSS hooks are the most expensive thing. If you like the FlameChart, which is just another way of visualizing this, you can go here and you can set it to chart, and it'll give you a really similar thing. So it's the same as before, like in this view, the heavy view, you have things ordered, filtered by how long they took. And the chart, it's like a very similar thing. Again, you're looking for the wide ones. Like the wider it is, you can see like the widest thing on here is anonymous function. You can drill into that. Similarly over here, the top one as far as self goes was this anonymous function. So those are just different ways you can view it. I use this a lot just to like really get deep in and start looking at like what JavaScript might be causing these problems, and start messing with your code from here. Again, this is like getting into the point where you just have to like really start looking at the application you wrote and what can be done. So then the last thing I use from the profiles page, let's see, oh, frozen. I'll close that. And the last thing I use from the profiles page is the memory heap allocation. And the Google team has these DevTools Docs, which was their original home of DevTools. But inside it, there are these really cool demos, which are just basically reduced test cases of like painting layouts or memory problems. So I have this one that I loaded up here, which is watch the memory grow. So I'm going to open up my DevTools again, go to profiles, or we can even start at timeline like we did before. So let's only capture timeline. or let's only capture memory in the timeline. So I'll hit record on it, and it really shouldn't be doing anything right now. And then I'll give it a second, and then I'll hit this button, which just basically goes through this loop and just generates a ton of DOM nodes that it doesn't ever get rid of. So I'll leave this running for just a second, then I'll stop the recording, and it'll set up all the events. And you can see what I was talking about earlier, where like this blue line, this used.js heap, just keeps going up and up and up and up and up. So that's not what you want to see. Another cool thing for if you're worried that your site has a memory leak, Chrome has this really cool thing. If you go over here, this isn't part of DevTools, but it is a really cool tool. Go to More Tools and go to Task Manager. This is like kind of a task manager just for your Chrome tabs, which is neat. And it has like memory, CPU, all that. But if you right-click on it, you can actually add JavaScript memory. And then you can sort by JavaScript memory, and we can see that my example 1 page is taking up a ton of JavaScript memory, but you can also just sit here and watch it as 82 becomes 84, and it keeps going up and up and up. So that's like a really cool area where we can see that we obviously have a memory leak. And then if we wanted to then figure out what the memory leak is, I use this heap allocations. And so these are very similar. A heap snapshot is just showing all of your page's memory distribution, so like what's being used for arrays or objects or strings or animations. Heap allocations is basically it just takes a couple of those heap snapshots over time, and that's where you can really see like what's getting worse, like what was small and is now getting bigger. So you can start a heap allocation. It'll do a record for a little while, watching these kind of come in, and then I'll stop it. And it'll load in, and it immediately can show me, like if we look at the size here, that these strings are the problem. These strings I have like 92 million of compared to just a few 100,000 of everything else. So you can dive into the strings, and you can see this is what's getting generated, these strings full of the letter X over and over and over and over again. So yeah, basically then you can look through this code, and you can see that we're basically just making these arrays and just joining them on the letter X. So this is really nice. Again, I'll get way more in depth into what you can do here in my workshop, but I do think it's pretty cool. If you're worried about a memory leak, use that task manager to see whether you have one or not, and then definitely use this heap allocation tool to see what the real causes are. A quick note, there's like shallow and retain size, which are the same here, but they likely won't be on your application. Shallow size is just the actual size of this thing in memory, of these strings. Retain size, because JavaScript has like the concept of closures, would be like how much memory can get freed up if you delete this and everything that it's the only reference to. I'm hoping that makes sense. I can talk about it more if people are confused, but basically like if you have a string and then you have another string that's pointing at it, or 2 arrays or something, shallow size would be the size of just the string or the array, and then retain size would be like everything that garbage collection can free up if you delete that thing. So anything that your thing is a last reference to. Hope that makes sense. Last thing I just wanted to end on was some really fun things. So the Chrome team is always pushing out really cool new experiments, and by default they're turned off because they could break things. But if you're a developer and you want to mess with them, I highly recommend doing so. So you can go to chrome://flags, and then you can just do a file find for DevTools, and you can enable developer tools experiments here, which looks like this. And then from then on, when you open up your DevTools, you can go to these 3 dots and go to settings, and you'll see a new tab, which is experiments. So you can see all these like really cool things that they're working on, accessibility inspection, all that. So like for example, go back to my home page for just a second, and I'll open up DevTools, and you notice that back in settings, I turned on this material design experiment that they're working on, and this is one I really, really like. So basically what you can do is you can click on something like this navigation bar, and then let's say I set the background to blue. You can click on it, and Chrome by default has this nice color picker where you can move things around. But now what they've done, which I really like, is they've added these predefined color palettes. So you can see here they've added the material design light that they've been working on. So you can pick from there. Another thing that's really useful, though, is you can switch it out to just the colors it found on your page. So I use this a lot at Twitter because as long as I have it set to page colors, it'll have our blue and our greens and our oranges, so I don't have to remember the hex code while I'm messing around in here. So I think those are really fun. There's some really cool experiments that they've been working on. including one that's like a paint visualizer, which I'll cover in my workshop, but that's like a really great way to visualize what's causing repaints and where you might have problems, all that kind of stuff. Cool, so I realize I think I'm a little bit over on time, so I guess I can turn over and we can do some Q&A. I'd be happy to answer anything more in depth that I can.
Awesome, that was great, John. So do you see the questions tab?
Yeah, I do, but I don't see any questions.
Oh, okay. Well, I will go through some of them real quick, just reading out loud. But real quick, I did touch on some people were asking whether or not the webinar will be recorded. The answer is yes. Give us a couple of days to get it edited. We will turn that around. We'll tweet about it. It'll be on our website, and it'll be emailed to everybody that registered for the webinar. So there's that. And also, we did hit max capacity for this webinar, which is awesome. So if anybody has heard of anybody that couldn't get in, just let them know that it will be available. So that's great. Okay, so I'll just go through a couple of these here. Let's see. Patrick asked if you could go over leverage browser catching in a little more detail.
Yeah. That one's, the only reason I glossed over it is because it's a little bit tricky and it depends a lot on your platform, like what your backend is serving. So basically, like if we go to the network tab over here, and I'll just do a refresh on my page, you can look at every file that comes down, which there's very few for mine. So if you like click, let me make this a little bit bigger. If you click on one like this PNG and you look at the headers that were sent, let me see, where is that? Or actually, I think it's in the I always get lost around here. Give me 1 second. Somewhere over here, yeah, cache control. So like these response headers get set by your backend service. So like if you're using that's why it kind of depends. Like if you're using PHP or Ruby or Node, like there's all these different ways to set those things. If you're using a content management system like WordPress, W3 Total Cache actually has a setting where you can specify like the cache life for different things. There's also, maybe I'll just tweet about it in a minute, but there's a really, really great article on HTML5 Rocks about leverage browser caching and like the philosophies behind it, like how long you should set things for, because it gets a little tricky. Like if you have your bundle.js and you set it to cache like, for a year or something like that, it gets a little bit tricky. Like how do you then update your website and let people see it? So it gets into like kind of concepts like cache busting. It gets a little bit far. If you wanted to hit me off this, I would like be happy to send some articles and talk more about it. It is a little bit complicated though.
So we just changed some settings around. John, do you see any questions now? You might need to expand the tab.
Yes, I do see some.
Awesome. It's maybe easier for you to read them than for me
to. Yeah, as far as the resources being available, yeah, I guess I'll coordinate with you all on like a way. I have all those links, and I even have a doc with all of that in it. So I'd really love to share all that. The recording should help, but I'd love to share all the links that I was talking about or pointing to. This is the audit report. Oh, right. Yeah, so this is big. So a lot of the stuff that I mentioned at the beginning, so is all about like concatenating, minifying files. All of that has to do with HTTP and the fact that the rule of thumb is that the less files, the better. All of that is changing dramatically with HTTP 2, which has been finalized. And with HTTP 2, I think that you'll actually want as many small files as possible. It kind of does a flip. So the audit report right now, I don't know that it takes into account that stuff, but I do know in Canary they have a lot of HTTP 2 support. I'm not sure about the audit report, but it is really important that like when you're on HTTP 2, you don't want to be concatenating in all of your files together. So yeah, that's a really good point. Somebody is a beginner doing Java stuff and Ruby. Yeah, that seems awesome. I definitely think you're on the right path. I definitely think like doing stuff like ForwardJS, free webinars, all that stuff is like a really great way. That's like definitely how I learned how to code. Leverage browser caching I covered. this one is how external callouts to analytics services get profiled against page weight and network cost. It really depends on how it's like up to the specific analytics service. So like Google Analytics is really minimal, and it's just like an asynchronous JavaScript request that pulls down their file. Some of the other ones like really do a lot, like tying into your cookies, or like even doing like tracking pixels on the screen, which can cause repaints. So it's definitely up to the ad or analytics service that you're using. But I would use the timeline tab and like see if any of your really fat rectangles boil down to ad or analytics calls, because then you can really see for yourself if that's a performance problem. Yeah, this one's, as a newbie, there's so much you're not aware of. I definitely think that's true. I think that Chrome, like kind of the point of this and the point of my talk that I'm going to be giving is that Chrome has like this incredible tool set which can really help you, get any site lightning fast and figure out exactly what's going on, but it's really overwhelming. Like it really just took me deciding to like sit down and really start clicking through and reading everything. They do have pretty good docs online, which I can link to as well. And then Paul Irish and Eddie Asmani are two people that are always doing videos on cool stuff that's new with them. So I definitely check them out on YouTube. I also do a lot of videos on YouTube for web performance, but yeah, there's a ton going on. So this one is, if you're using throttling as a 3G connection, do you need to enable mobile layout in DevTools? You don't. So the network throttling is independent of the emulation. So with emulation, I can kind of show quickly here. You can like enable emulation, then you can like become a device, like you can be an iPad. And so then you can see here like what your page will look like on iPad. But those are two separate things from each other. So if you do emulate an iPad, it won't do network throttling by default. Those are separate things, but you should use them together. That being said, the emulation is fantastic, but if you're building serious applications, you should test them on the real thing. And you can do that with like input devices. So you can like plug an Android phone into your computer and then use Chrome to profile on that phone, and that's something I'll cover in depth in my workshop. To use Enury DevTools, I'm not sure what that is. I haven't heard of it. Sorry. Yep, recorded. Oh, Canary. Awesome.
Oh, there you go. I'm tempted with that. There you go.
Yeah, I do use Canary DevTools. It's about the same experience as turning on all the experiments that I covered, but I do use Canary DevTools. They change a lot. Like I think a lot of times stuff goes in and out of Canary. So I usually just use them to like poke around and see what cool stuff is coming down the line, but I'd say most of the time I still use the the standard Chrome DevTools just with experiments enabled. Yeah, I think like this is talking about like any props to Safari or Firefox or other monitoring features. Like they're all really cool. So like one thing that definitely keep a lookout for is like the stuff that Microsoft's been doing with Edge. They have some like really cool dev tools coming down the line, and they just look fantastic. Similarly, Firefox has been doing like some really cool stuff around animations. Yeah, so to be honest, I find myself using different dev tools all the time based on what I'm doing. Like Firefox has been really killing it lately with some of that stuff. Chrome is my default for like networking, JavaScript profiling. I think that it's the best for that, but I would definitely check them all out because they really do just push separate things. Even like Safari's been pushing some really cool stuff with like computed styles, so you can like see everything that's affecting a certain div. So yeah, I think they're all really cool, and I really like as they share features with each other. Oh, tall green lines, do you want them back in the timeline? So any tall line you can think of as being bad, like because it's like it's flipped upside down, so it's like the bottom is the higher and the top is the lower, and you want to stay like above, or in this case visually below 60 frames per second, because anything more than that is great. So anytime you see it jank up through 30 or even lower than 30, it's a problem. That being said, you can't just avoid stuff. Like if you have push state single page app and you have to repaint the entire screen, it's gonna, you know what I mean, it's gonna be big. But so I would just use like any tall line is a potential problem. But you don't necessarily have to, fix every single tall line, especially on like big state transitions. Yeah, network tab has a column called priority in the request results table. So yeah, back over here, I gotta show all. Yeah, so basically, like the priority has to do with things like you can have. Basically, it's what the browser's got all these really intelligent ways of trying to determine what's important, like what's crucial to the page, what isn't. So you'd see like high priority is going to be mostly like your core JavaScript files, your style sheets, things like that. Chrome is like amazingly great at figuring some things out, so it'll often try to find things that it can lower the priority for. This is still dealing with like HTTP's limitation of only being able to do so many synchronous requests. Full day workshop. Twitter handle is jkup, J-K-U-P. That's for GitHub and Twitter and all the things. And I love talking about the stuff on there, so feel free to message me on Twitter, and I'll definitely respond. Yeah, debugging an error, I'm just fearing about time. Like, that'll be big in my workshop, looking at, like, debugging and things like that. The best way, just in, like, a 2-second thing, is to check the console tab. If there's any JavaScript errors, they'll show up in red here. But I definitely will talk more about that in my workshop. Where do you find the DevTools? I covered that quickly at the beginning. It's you can right-click and inspect element, or you can like Command Option I, or you can go to View Developer Tools. Cool. I think that's pretty good. Oh, Task Manager. That's in Chrome. You just you click on the three. I don't know if you're still sharing my screen, but you click on like the three things where you would, in the top right of Chrome, and then you would go to More Tools, Task Manager, and then you'll have to right-click to enable the JavaScript one. Okay, cool. I think that's good. Good on questions. Yeah, please let me know if there's other stuff you'd like. I'm still putting the workshop together, so if there's stuff you'd like covered that I didn't cover today, I'd love to hear it.